So now let's start talking more about DOM selectors. At this point, we've really only used one DOM selector so far, and that's a method on document that selects by ID. Now, ID is just that, and it's intended to be unique on the page, which is why it's kind of a easy one to use because I can specifically target the one that I want because there'll only be one of them, right? So we've been using this get element by ID, and I think in the beginning I did use query selector, but I decided against showing it yet because I think it just helps to keep it a little simpler. But now it's time for us to take it to the next level because here's the next challenge I want us to do to accomplish in code. But in order to do it, we have to learn a little more. Now here's the thing I want us to do. I had shown, and I believe at the end of when I did the CRUD where I disabled when the user hit submit. Okay. Well, how would I do that if I wanted to disable every button in here when the user hit submit, right? I'd have to have a way to target them, right? So you might think, right, well, can we use get element by ID? And we can't at this point because there's not a unique ID on each of these buttons. Okay, so let's do a little knowledge building. And this is where I want to come back to ChatGDP because I did like this query real quick, like, most commonly used DOM selectors, just to get a little information about them. And here was an article from 21, so that's great. I went and looked at it. I think it was fine. I asked the same question here and I got what I felt was a little better answer, but similar, right? So a DOM selector is a programming interface for the HTML and the XML. We're not using XML in this course, but represents the page so that the program can change the structure, the style, and the doc. And the selectors represent, right, the way to get at those DOM elements. And this is the one we've been using. So let's say for our need, right? Again, the user, and this is very often, you may be the user, but very often as you develop more code, you're going to be, a user is going to ask you, like, here's the requirements I have for my program, here's what I want it to do. So the users come to you and said, listen, I like that you put that disable button, which I don't have on here right now to show you. But really, I'd want all of them disabled because I'd want them to only focus on that particular entry. So how would I do that? So we'd go back to our list and we'd start looking at them and we'd say, get element by class name. Could we use that, right? For what we want. Is there any class names that we're using at this point in our code, right? Not a lot really, right? But we could at least play with the feature, right? We could say class DOM elements, and we could say document dot get. Let's just remember, I think it's get elements by class name, and then we'd have to give it like the only one I think I remember is that one. No, actually, there's another one. So if I did DOM class, right? Class DOM and looked at it. Oh, interesting, right? So before, when we were using the ID, and in this case, if we wanted to see what that looked like, we could reload that. But we've looked at it a couple of times. It represented the whole form. But in this case, it brought back, right? Is that right? Did it bring back the one I wanted? By class name. Let's just verify. Now here's the point where we want to verify that that actually was the class name that I used, because maybe it wasn't. Oh, I did class error. No, I didn't. And that's why it brought back a collection, because it said, no, that wasn't right. So let's try that again. So in this case, I think there was an error. Error was a class, right? So class DOM. And now let's go look at that to see what was in there. Was that right? Oh, look at that. I did that one as well as wrong. So it was actually spelled out, or. So now let's look at class. Oh, nice. Okay. But interesting here is it actually in where we got a single item returned or a single reference to the DOM, like where we were using the get element by ID, when we do get element by class name, we get what's called an HTML collection. Now, notice what this is basically, and you could search for it because this is a good thing to understand as an HTML collection, right? What is it? Well, it's an interface. It's like an array, but not completely. But it allows us to iterate over, which is awesome. It allows us to call length on it. So it's kind of like an array. It's a generic representation of a collection, right? And we can use it. You can convert it to an array. So this is very common with because here's the deal. It's going to look across the DOM and it's going to find wherever that class name appears. And unlike document get element by ID that only should return one item, and it will actually only return one item, this is very logically, it's going to return many. Now let's go back and find out why. We got one here, and actually notice it shows us, like if we look here, okay, I had an error up there. It also represents the div error, the error itself, and then the prototype, which we're going to start talking about prototype here pretty soon. Okay, so I think it was just there. Trying to remember what the difference was here. Why did we get an error at the div and at the ERR? And then we got the error. Yeah, I could dig a little farther, but I mean, for some reason, it's giving you both, right? Oh, so it's giving you the ID. Do I have an I? Oh, it is. Interestingly enough, I wonder why it's giving you the dot error. Oh, because of the way the class is listed inside the div. Oh, yeah, nice, right? So this is where using these things really helps because then you start to have to dig around about why is it returning that. So going back to our problem, can we use this to touch or update every button on here? And the answer is, yeah, well, we don't have a class name. And the question might be, can we add it? Okay, we could for sure, but let's keep going and looking at these other ones. We could do it. We could also get element by tag name. Now that's one that might be interesting, right? So let's actually try that one because we know all of these. Let's just do a clear real quick. And let's say buttons, let's abbreviate, right, is equal to document dot. Okay, and now what are we going to look for is button, right? So we're looking for a specific tag name. So now let's look at this and look, there's 13 buttons that's returned. Now these are a little more clear. You can roll over each one. Look at that first one all the way down. Okay, so could we use this to target these buttons and change, update an attribute that would be disabled? Okay, consider that. So, and if you're thinking as you're rolling, and by the way, you should be following along in DevTools, seeing this output to get your hands in there and get used to it, right? Okay. So could we could there's a possibility but what's the catch here is that first one is a submit. So we wouldn't want to disable this one because this is the only one we would want to actually have it not be disabled and everything else disabled. And what we're doing is basically giving a little UI enhancement, a user interface enhancement, so that the user is clear. The only thing you can do right now is submit maybe your new updated information. Let's keep going. Query selector. It selects the first element that matches the selector, the first element. Now this sounds very much like this. Okay, so let's actually look at this one now. Okay, so query selector. So what if we did the same thing where let's clear this out. Let's do, buttons again, equal to document dot, and let's do query selector. Okay, and now I think, I don't know if I can do button. Let's see if that BTNS. What does it do? The selector in a sense acts like the get element by ID, But only in this respect, it only pulls the first occurrence of this, right? And it gives us that exact reference. So then there's the other one, which is get query selector all, which returns all the elements based on whatever our CSS selector is. Okay. Now, that could be CSS selector, but it also can be whatever we want that's on the page. And there's different ways, and it's good to research all the different ways you can use these to select elements on your page. Okay, let's go back over here and try then. Now let's see what happens, right, when we do query selector all. Now we get a node list. Oh my God. First we get an HTML collection, and now we're getting a node list, right? And it looks like the same thing we got back, right? So if we scroll through here, it's like, oh yeah, I got the submit button. It got all the buttons again. So now let's go look at what is a node list in JavaScript. Oh, good. I love it when MDN comes up first, right? Objects are a collection of nodes, usually returned by node child, which we could talk about traversing, and we probably will, right? So, and then it talks about live versus static nodes. But again, a node or a node list is basically, right? It's not an array, but it is possible to iterate over it. And really, that's all we care is can I do something to each one of the buttons that's on my page, right? Okay, so now that you have this, okay, now that you have this, I want you to, again, think about, we've learned about these queries, different ways to select the DOM, right? Is what approach would you take at this point to select all the buttons inside of the table to disable them when a edit button is clicked, okay? So first, what would you do and where would you put the code? Those are the two things I want to know, right? So when you're looking at your README file here, right? So, okay, which DOM selectors and where would the code go in all the code that we've written? So first think about it and then think about where we would put that code, because of course that's what I'm going to do next. Now, I'm not going to give you any more hints because I think this activity of making you think about it. Now, by the way, again, if you want to code this, code it up, right? Totally code that up and get that done, and then we can look at the solution and talk about, between you and I, how your solution would differ from mine. But at minimum, if you're not sure how to code it, at least go in. Not at least, but go in, because and I almost feel bad saying that. It should be something that expands your thinking and doing some research on some of these elements to figure out how could I use them, right, to my advantage in my task of selecting all of the buttons in my table to disable them. Okay, give that a try. That's your challenge. And then I'll show you my solution next.